Please let me in. It's so cold out here.
The cold wasn't the worst part. It was their laughter, sharp, cruel, and unrelenting, echoing through the window as they locked me out of the house I had once called home. My husband's smirk burned more than the snow biting my skin, and my family stood behind him, mocking every shiver, every pleading look. Alone in the storm, I realized they didn't just reject me. They wanted me to feel
Out
small,
here.
invisible, utterly worthless. This is the story of a woman who was thrown out of her own home, humiliated by those she loved, and today, it is being retold by me, the one they tried to erase. Hello, family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request, please. Subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. The cold wasn't the worst part. Sarah Bennett's fists pounded the heavy oak door until her knuckles burned. The snow cut out her face. The wind howled like it wanted her bones. But nothing hurt more than what she saw through that frosted window. Her husband, Daniel, sitting at the dining table smiling. Not at her. Never at her. He leaned back in his chair, sipping wine, while his parents sat nearby. Margaret, elegant as always in pearls and silk, tilted her glass and laughed. Edward gave one of his rare smirks. And then, Daniel turned his face toward the window, toward his shivering wife. He raised his glass, smirked, and mouthed the word, pathetic. Sarah banged harder. Daniel! Please let me in. It's freezing. I don't have my phone. Her words vanished into the storm. Her breath clouded the glass. Inside, they clinked glasses, their laughter louder now, sharper, like knives slicing into her chest. She stumbled back, the snow nearly up to her knees. This was her home, and yet she stood outside like a beggar. Her voice cracked. Please, Daniel, please. And then, as if her suffering were entertainment, Daniel leaned forward, tapped the window pane with his glass, and laughed. Margaret joined him, her thin smile cruel. Sarah pressed her palms against the glass. For a moment she thought Edward might look away, that maybe he wasn't as heartless as the others, but his eyes were like stone, unmoved. The wind roared, dragging Sarah down to her knees. That's when it hit her. They didn't just reject her. They wanted her to feel small, invisible, worthless. And as the snow swallowed her, the memories came rushing back. Sarah hadn't always felt like this. 3 years earlier, she had stood in this same house, heart pounding with joy, thinking she was the luckiest woman alive. She was a waitress back then, working double shifts just to help her parents pay bills. Life was small, predictable, until Daniel Bennett walked into her diner. He was handsome, wealthy, and every woman in town turned their head when he passed. But he chose her, or at least that's what she thought. Sarah, he had said on their second date, his voice smooth like honey. I can give you a life no man in this town can. But you have to trust me. You have to listen to me, and she had. He swept her off her feet, bought her clothes she never dreamed she'd own, took her to restaurants where the bill for dessert was more than her week's paycheck. Her parents, Helen and Robert, were thrilled. They kept saying how lucky she was, how Daniel was a real man, a provider. When he proposed in front of the Bennett mansion, her parents cried with joy. But even then, cracks had shown. Margaret, his mother, had looked her up and down at their engagement party, then leaned in and whispered, "We could have done better for Daniel. But if you behave, we'll manage." Edward hardly spoke to her, only giving curt nods like she wasn't worth words. And Daniel, oh, Daniel. He was protective in public, wrapping his arm around her waist, kissing her forehead. People said, "What a devoted husband." But behind closed doors, his tone was different. "You don't need a job anymore," he told her after the wedding. "The Bennett name will take care of you. Focus on the house. Focus on me." She had loved her job at the diner, but she gave it up. She thought it was love. She thought it was security. But soon she realized it was control. He monitored her phone, questioned every purchase, If she bought a new dress without asking, he'd sneer. Ungrateful. Do you know how much I spend on you? At night, he often came home late. When she asked where he'd been, he smiled, sharp and cold. Don't start with your paranoia, Sarah. You'll ruin us if you keep acting crazy. Gaslighting. She didn't know the word for it then, but she felt it, like poison in her veins. It was at a family dinner when the suspicion turned unbearable. Sarah had spent hours preparing herself, curling her hair, wearing the emerald dress Daniel once said made her look like a woman worth keeping. She wanted desperately to belong. The Bennetts' dining hall gleamed with silverware and crystal chandeliers. Margaret sat at the head of the table like a queen, Edward silent beside her. Daniel, of course, sat at the center, smiling for their wealthy guests. And then Chloe entered. She was Daniel's new assistant, young, tall, with perfect red lips. She carried a folder but stayed for dinner, and every time Daniel spoke, his hand brushed hers. Every time she laughed, it was at something he whispered too low for Sarah to hear. Sarah's chest tightened. She tried to keep her voice steady. Daniel, maybe your assistant should sit with the staff. The room fell silent. Margaret's smile was like ice. Oh, Sarah, you're being insecure again. Daniel needs Chloe close to him. She's competent, unlike some laughter rippled around the table. Sarah's face burned. I'm his wife, Margaret. Not Chloe. Daniel's voice cut like a blade. Enough. You embarrassed me in front of my family. He slammed his fork down. The clatter echoed. Maybe if you weren't so suspicious, Sarah, I wouldn't need assistants who actually respect me. Chloe's lips curved into a small, victorious smile. Sarah's hands trembled around her wine glass. She looked at her parents, sitting at the far end. Helen gave a nervous smile. Robert looked down at his plate. Neither spoke. Neither defended her. And in that silence, Sarah understood something. She wasn't part of this family. She was the outsider, the charity case, the joke, and Daniel wanted her to know it. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give a future to children and women who have been abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing and turning on your notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Also, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and how did this story speak to you? The snow had barely melted when Sarah's world collapsed again. She sat at the small desk in the guest house, her laptop screen glowing. An email had arrived from an anonymous address. Her hands shook as she clicked it open. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Daniel and Chloe. Daniel's hand on Chloe's waist outside a hotel. Chloe leaning against his chest, her lips brushing his cheek. And then, one photo inside a dim hotel room. Daniel shirtless, Chloe in his arms. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Her stomach lurched. For weeks she had suspected. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the perfume that wasn't hers on his clothes. But to see it, to see him with her, it felt like a blade twisting into her chest. When she heard the sound of his car in the driveway, she snapped the laptop shut. She needed answers. Daniel walked in like a king entering his palace, his coat flung over the chair, his phone buzzing in his hand. He didn't look at her. Daniel, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We need to talk. He sighed. What now? She held up the laptop, flipping the screen toward him. Explain this. His eyes flicked to the photos and then back to her. His face didn't even flinch. Instead, a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. You've been snooping again. Snooping? Daniel, these are photos of you with Chloe. At a hotel. Don't lie to me. He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah, you're losing it. Do you hear yourself? Do you realize how insane you sound? You're obsessed with destroying this marriage. You want to paint me as the villain because you can't control your paranoia. Her heart pounded. I'm not paranoid, Daniel. I'm your wife. I deserve the truth. The truth? His laugh was sharp, cruel. The truth is you're unstable. Everyone sees it. My parents, your parents. They all know you've lost your mind. Tears welled in her eyes. My parents? They wouldn't. He cut her off with a sneer. They called me last week. told me they're worried about you. Said they are embarrassed by your behavior. Do you know what they said? That I should be patient because you're not well." Her chest tightened. That's not true. But deep down, a shadow of doubt formed. Her parents had been distant lately. Calls were shorter, conversations colder. Daniel's voice rose. "You accuse me of cheating. You embarrass me at dinners. You can't even act like a proper wife. Look at you, pathetic, desperate, clinging. You think I'd want you when I can have someone like Chloe?" Her knees nearly buckled. His words weren't just meant to hurt, they were meant to destroy. Before she could respond, Margaret entered, her pearls gleaming against her neck. Edward trailed behind her, silent as always. "What's happening here?" Margaret asked, her eyes narrowing at Sarah. "She's accusing me again," Daniel said smoothly, slipping his arm around Chloe's absence like it was waiting for her. "She's convinced I'm unfaithful. She won't let it go." She's spiraling. Margaret's face hardened. "Sarah, this has to stop. You're ungrateful. Do you realize how lucky you are? My son provides everything for you. And this is how you repay him? With wild accusations?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I saw the photos, Margaret." "I'm not making this up." Margaret's lips curled. "Photos can be faked. And even if they weren't, maybe you drove him to it. A man needs respect, Sarah. Something you clearly don't understand." Edward's silence was worse than words. He only stared at her, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. Sarah's phone rang on the table. Her mother's number lit up the screen. With trembling hands, she answered. "Honey," Helen's voice came through, hesitant. "We heard you're having trouble with Daniel." Sarah's heart leapt. "Mom, please, you have to listen. He's cheating on me. I have proof." But Helen cut her off, her voice sharp. "Don't say things like that. Daniel takes care of us. He's been helping your father and me with money, Sarah. Without him, we'd lose the house. You need to be careful. Don't upset him. Keep him happy." The words slammed into her like ice water. "You're taking his side? Over your own daughter?" Her father's voice joined the line, low and weary. "Sarah, don't ruin this. We can't afford to." Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. Daniel's smirk told her he already knew what her parents had said. She was surrounded, cornered, alone. And for the first time she realized, no one was coming to save her. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation. It started with little things. Sarah returned from the store one afternoon to find her clothes missing from the master bedroom closet. Her jewelry box was gone too. She searched frantically, only to find her belongings stacked in the guest house at the far end of the property. When Daniel came home, she confronted him. "Why are my things out here?" He shrugged casually. "The main bedroom's being renovated." "You'll be more comfortable here." Her eyes darted toward the mansion. "Without you?" His smirk was cold. "Exactly." She wanted to scream, but instead she clenched her fists. If she pushed too hard, she knew he'd twist it against her again. That night she tried to pay for groceries, but her card was declined. Another card, declined. When she logged into the bank account, her name was gone. Daniel had cut her off completely. When she asked him about it, his reply was cruel and final. "You don't need money, Sarah. You need obedience. Every penny you have comes from me anyway." Her phone buzzed. She opened social media and froze. Chloe was posting photos wearing Sarah's diamond earrings, the same ones Daniel gave her for their first anniversary. One photo caption read, "When a man knows your worth, he gives you everything." Another photo showed Chloe in a car Sarah once drove, Daniel's hand resting on the steering wheel. Sarah's stomach twisted. The message was clear. Chloe was replacing her piece by piece. She tried to tell herself she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't imagining things. But the evidence kept piling up. One evening, when Daniel left his briefcase carelessly open, she peeked inside. Her eyes widened at the papers inside. Legal documents, financial forms. And then she saw it. Her name. But it wasn't her handwriting. Her signature had been forged. Again and again, on property transfers, bank withdrawals, asset agreements. Daniel was stripping everything tied to her name and putting it under his own. Her chest heaved. "Oh my God!" She snapped photos of the documents with her phone, her hands trembling. But the cruelest blow came the next morning. She drove into town to beg her parents for help, clutching the proof. When she arrived, her father wouldn't even let her inside. "Sarah," he said, standing in the doorway, "you have to stop this. Daniel's been helping us keep afloat. He told us you're unstable. We can't afford to lose his support." Tears burned her eyes. "Dad, he's lying. He forged my name on documents. He's stealing everything. Please, you have to believe me." Helen appeared behind Robert, her face pale but firm. "Don't make us choose between you and survival, Sarah. We're too old for this. Daniel takes care of us. If you can't handle being his wife, that's your problem." Sarah staggered back, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're choosing him over me? Your own daughter?" Helen's lips trembled. "We're choosing stability." "You should too." The door shut in her face. Her body went numb. She had no allies, no family, not even her parents. By the time she returned to the guest house, the snow had begun to fall again. The storm that night was violent, the wind battering the windows like fists. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket, listening to the howling outside. At midnight, the door burst open. Daniel stood there, his silhouette sharp against the storm's white fury. Margaret and Edward flanked him like shadows. He sneered. "What are you doing in here?" Sarah's voice trembled. "This is my home. I live here, not anymore." He stepped forward, his tone mocking. "You don't belong here, Sarah. You never did. You're a trespasser now." Margaret's eyes glittered. "You embarrassed our family long enough." Edward, cold and silent, turned the key in the lock. Sarah's heart raced. "Please, it's freezing. You can't do this." But Daniel grabbed her arm, dragged her to the door, and shoved her into the storm. She stumbled into the snow, barefoot, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. "Daniel, please, don't leave me out here," she screamed, pounding on the door with her fists. He leaned against the door frame, his smile cruel. "Maybe this will teach you your place." Margaret's laugh echoed. Edward closed the door slowly, deliberately, as Sarah's cries grew hoarse. The lock clicked. The lights inside glowed warm and golden. Through the frosted glass, she saw them turn back to their wine, their laughter carrying into the night. Snow clawed at her face, her hands turning purple as she beat against the glass. But the only thing she got in return was Daniel's final smirk before the curtains were drawn shut. The blizzard howled, drowning her screams. She collapsed to her knees, frost biting her skin, the world spinning into white. And just before darkness claimed her, she understood the cruel truth. They hadn't simply locked her out. They had erased her. The storm nearly killed her. By the time Sarah stumbled into town, half frozen and barely conscious, she was more ghost than woman. A kind stranger found her, collapsed by a bus stop, and called an ambulance. When she woke, it wasn't in her home or even a hospital. It was a women's shelter. The smell of soup filled the air, voices murmured around her, and a thin blanket covered her bruised, frost-bitten hands. She sat up slowly, her throat raw. "You're safe now," a volunteer whispered. "Rest." But Sarah didn't feel safe. She felt erased. Within days, her humiliation spread like wildfire. Daniel and Chloe had posted online, painting her as violent, unstable, a danger to herself and others. Fake text messages appeared on social media. Messages she never sent, conversations twisted to make her look unhinged. "She attacked me," one caption read, signed under Daniel's name. "Pray for my family." "We've endured years of abuse," Margaret added. The world believed them. News blogs picked it up. Gossip channels ran with it. Overnight, Sarah went from the lucky wife of Daniel Bennett to the crazy, unstable woman who lost everything. She dialed her parents again and again, straight to voicemail. She sent texts. "Please, it's not true. Please talk to me." No reply. When she tried calling from the shelter phone, her father finally answered. His voice was flat. "Sarah, stop calling us. We can't do this anymore. You've embarrassed us enough." The line went dead. Sarah dropped the phone, her chest hollow. She curled up on the thin mattress and wept until her body shook. No family, no friends, no home. She had lost everything. Days passed in silence. She sat by the window, watching snow fall, wondering if the world would be better off without her. And then, someone sat beside her. A woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp but kind. "Sarah Bennett," the woman said quietly as though testing the name. Sarah blinked. "How do you know me?" "I've seen your photo in the papers. At those charity events. I used to practice law years ago." "Name's Grace." She extended a hand. "And I don't believe a word of what they're saying about you." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of warmth. She clasped Grace's hand, her voice cracking. "They ruined me. My own family turned on me. I have nothing left." Grace shook her head. "You still have the truth, and that's worth more than you realize." Sarah frowned. "The truth doesn't matter. Daniel controls everything. He forged my signature. He cut me off. Everyone believes him." Grace leaned closer. "Not everyone. If he really forged your name, that's fraud. If he really set you up, there's a trail, and trails can be followed. You just need help finding it." Sarah's heart thudded. For weeks she had felt powerless, but now for the first time, she saw a crack in Daniel's armor. "Will you help me?" she whispered. Grace smiled softly. "Of course, but you'll have to be patient and careful. Daniel Bennett is powerful, but men like him always leave evidence behind." Sarah nodded, her eyes burning with a new kind of fire. That night, Grace sat with her as she went through everything she still had. Her frostbite medical records, the photos of forged documents she'd taken, the emails, the receipts. Piece by piece, Sarah began to rebuild a case. But then one morning, as she scrolled through a gossip site at the shelter's shared computer, her breath caught. The headline read, "Daniel Bennett set to wed new love, Chloe Whitmore." The article claimed Daniel had filed for divorce, citing Sarah's mental instability and cruelty. Margaret was quoted as saying, "We are grateful Daniel found happiness again after the torment he suffered." Sarah's blood boiled. Her marriage wasn't even over, and they were planning a wedding. Worse, Margaret was preparing to sell the very house Sarah once called home. They weren't just replacing her, they were erasing her existence entirely. Sarah closed her eyes, her fists tight. She had been their victim long enough, and this time she swore she wouldn't go down quietly. Grace didn't waste time. Within days, she introduced Sarah to someone she trusted, a sharp-eyed investigative journalist named Michael Turner. Michael had been digging into the Bennett family for months. Rumors of tax evasion, shady business deals, and secret offshore accounts had crossed his desk, but until now he lacked the missing piece, the insider. "You're that missing piece," Michael said during their first meeting at a quiet cafe. His voice was low but steady. "You lived in their house. You saw things no one else has. If you're willing to work with me, we can bring them down." Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "They'll destroy me if they find out." Grace reached across the table, placing her hand over Sarah's. "They already tried. And you survived. Now it's your turn." Something inside Sarah shifted. For weeks she'd been the victim, the outcast, the erased. But now she had allies, and allies meant hope. From that day forward, Sarah lived a double life. By day, she blended into the shelter, quiet and unremarkable. By night, she worked with Grace and Michael, gathering every shred of evidence she could find. Her frostbite medical records proved she had been thrown out in the middle of a storm. Her screenshots of Daniel's forged signatures showed fraud. Emails from Chloe flaunting jewelry and cars once belonging to Sarah hinted at stolen property. Old texts from Margaret, belittling her, painted a picture of abuse. Michael guided her carefully. "We need a pattern. They isolated you, stole from you, and smeared your name. That's a story people will want to hear, but more importantly, it's a story backed by proof." Sarah's confidence grew with each passing day. She started recording everything, her calls with lawyers, her messages to blocked family members, even the cold rejections from her parents. Each detail was another nail for Daniel's coffin, but she told no one else. Not the other women at the shelter, not the staff, not even her parents, though part of her still longed for their support. Her comeback had to be a secret. Daniel thrived on control, and for the first time, she was taking it away from him. Weeks later, Michael handed her an envelope. Inside were glossy invitations to Daniel and Chloe's engagement party. The event was to be held at the Bennett mansion, her mansion. Sarah's stomach churned as she stared at the invitation. They're celebrating in my house, and I'm out here in a shelter. Michael's jaw tightened. Good. Let them celebrate. The higher they climb, the harder the fall. Grace smiled faintly. You're not going to stop them tonight, Sarah. But soon. Patience. Sarah nodded, but anger burned in her chest. On the night of the party, she couldn't stay away. She dressed in the plain coat the shelter had given her, pulled the hood low, and stood across the street from the glowing mansion. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter floated into the cold night air, and music spilled from the windows. Through the glass, she saw them. Chloe glittered in a red gown, her fingers heavy with jewels that once belonged to Sarah. She clung to Daniel's arm, her smile wide, her eyes triumphant. Daniel looked smug, basking in the attention of wealthy guests who toasted to his new beginning. Margaret swept through the room like a queen, her champagne glass raised high. Finally, she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, we got rid of that crazy wife. Daniel deserves better, and now he has it. Laughter filled the room. Glasses clinked. Sarah's chest rose and fell, her breath sharp in the cold. She clenched her fists in her pockets, every muscle in her body screaming to storm inside, to drag them down in front of their guests. But she didn't move. Her face was calm, her posture steady. From the outside, she looked like a woman broken, but inside, fire burned in her veins. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the winter wind, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Her eyes locked on Daniel's smirk through the window, and in that moment, Sarah made a silent vow. The next time she stepped into that house, it wouldn't be as the discarded wife begging for entry. It would be as the woman who owned it, and when that day came, they would all regret underestimating her. The morning of the wedding announcement dawned with a silence that felt unnatural. Snow blanketed the streets like a shroud, muffling the city's noise. But inside the Bennett estate, there was no silence. Only laughter, champagne corks, and the clinking of glasses. Sarah stood across town in Grace's small apartment, staring at the television. A news anchor's voice cut sharp through the quiet. This morning, the Daily Chronicle released shocking evidence against businessman Daniel Bennett and his family. Documents reveal widespread fraud, forgery, and allegations of abuse against his estranged wife, Sarah Bennett. The exposé, supported by medical records, photographs, and legal testimony, accuses Daniel of forging his wife's signature to transfer assets, while his parents, Margaret and Edward Bennett, are implicated in tax crimes and fraud. Sarah's chest rose and fell, her fists clenched. She had waited for this moment, this strike, for months. On the screen, images flashed, photos of the forged documents, her frostbitten hands taken by doctors at the shelter. Screenshots of Chloe flaunting jewelry that wasn't hers. Even a grainy video clip Michael had secured, showing Daniel bragging drunkenly about how easy it was to break her. The anchor continued. The Bennett family is facing possible investigation by federal authorities. Social media is exploding with the hashtag Justice for Sarah. Grace switched off the TV and turned to Sarah. It's begun. Sarah nodded, her face calm but her eyes burning with fire. They wanted me erased. Today, they'll be the ones erased. Meanwhile, at the Bennett estate, chaos brewed. Guests had gathered in the grand ballroom, where Daniel and Chloe were set to announce their engagement. The air reeked of wealth, perfume, roses, champagne. But beneath it, whispers spread like smoke. People scrolled through their phones, murmuring. Faces turned toward Daniel, then back to screens. Margaret stood at the center, her pearls gleaming, her glass raised. Pay no attention to lies spread by the bitter and broken, she announced, her voice sharp. Today is about love, about Daniel and Chloe. We all know Sarah was unstable. She's just trying to drag us down. But before the applause could begin, the doors burst open. Authorities stormed in, badges flashing, voices commanding. Daniel Bennett, Margaret Bennett, Chloe Whitmore, you're all required for questioning. Gas rippled through the guests. Phones were raised, cameras flashed. What is the meaning of this? Margaret shrieked, her composure cracking for the first time. "Do you know who we are?" An officer stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're suspects in fraud and tax evasion investigations. You're coming with us." Daniel's face contorted with fury. He shoved a glass off the table, shattering it. "This is a setup. She did this. That worthless woman set us up." Chloe clung to him, trembling. "Daniel, what's happening?" The crowd watched in stunned silence as the once untouchable family was led out in handcuffs. Margaret's screams echoed down the marble hall. Daniel spat curses, and Chloe wept into her hands. And somewhere, Sarah smiled. That same evening, Sarah returned to the shelter. She sat at the long table, surrounded by women who had once looked at her as one of them. Now they looked at her with awe. "You did it," one whispered. "You stood up to them." Sarah shook her head softly. "No, I stood up for myself, and now I stand for all of us." The next day, she received a letter from the court, her name restored, her rights reinstated. Ownership of the Bennett family house returned to her. She drove back there alone. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked up the long driveway. The mansion loomed, silent now, its lights off, its windows dark. For the first time, it didn't intimidate her. Inside, the halls echoed with emptiness. The grand dining room where she had once been humiliated felt smaller, weaker. Dust lay on the table where Margaret had once raised her glass in triumph. She walked from room to room, her fingers grazing the walls. She paused at the master bedroom, the place Daniel had banished her from, and then at the window where she had once begged in the storm. Her reflection in the glass was not the same broken woman. Grace met her there later that afternoon. "It's yours again," Grace said gently. "You can live here now." Rebuild Sarah shook her head. "This house is poison. It will never be home again. But maybe it can be something more." "What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes softened. "A shelter. A place for women like us, like me. No one else should ever stand outside these doors, begging to be let in. From now on, this house opens its doors to those who need it most." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "You've turned their cruelty into something powerful." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's the only revenge I need." But her story wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, her parents appeared at her new apartment, their faces pale with desperation. "Sarah," Helen began, her voice shaking, "we were wrong. Please forgive us. We believed Daniel because he supported us. But we see now. We see what he did to you. Please, we're sorry." Robert's eyes brimmed with tears. "We lost everything when he was arrested. We don't know what to do. Please, we need you." Sarah stood in the doorway, her posture strong, her eyes steady. "I begged you to believe me," she said quietly. "I begged you when I was freezing in the snow, when I was left with nothing. You chose him over me. You let him buy your loyalty." Helen reached out. "We're your parents." Sarah stepped back. "No, you were Daniel's meal ticket, not mine. I'm not your lifeline anymore." Her parents froze, stunned by her calmness. She closed the door gently, not with anger, but with finality. For the first time, she felt no need for their approval. Weeks passed, and the story of the Bennett downfall dominated headlines. Daniel and Margaret faced charges of fraud and tax evasion. Chloe vanished from social media, her once smug smile erased. Edward, silent as always, turned state witness, his reputation ruined. And Sarah? Sarah rebuilt herself. The grand house was transformed into a shelter, its golden chandeliers now lighting halls filled with laughter, support, and second chances. Women who had been erased, just like her, found safety within its walls. On the night of the shelter's opening, Sarah stood by the door, welcoming the first women inside. Snow fell softly outside, but this time the doors stayed open. Later, as she walked alone through the quiet halls, she paused by a window overlooking the snowy lawn. She placed her hand on the glass, remembering the night she had begged to be let in. Her reflection looked back at her, not as a victim, not as the discarded wife, but as the woman who had taken her life back. Her voice, soft but steady, filled the silence. "In the storm, I thought I was dying, but the storm only washed them away so I could finally see myself." She smiled faintly, turned off the lights, and walked away. For the first time in years, Sarah Bennett was free. and this time no one could erase her.